What sort of requirements do these sort of problems place on a supercomputer? Firstly, remember that a supercomputer is super because it has many cores to divide the workload between. In this case, the workload consists of solving a very large system of linear equations, or matrix equation. Further, most of the numbers in the matrix that we are trying to solve are zeros. In the earlier days of supercomputing, the benchmark, known as LINPACK, was used. Now this also consists of solving a large system of linear equations, but it is what is called a dense matrix. There are few zeros. This affects how much time the computer spends retrieving the values and how much time it spends adding them together. The sparse matrix solvers used for computational mechanics actually spend far more time retrieving the values from the sparse matrix from memory than they do adding them together, because you only have to add together 4 or maybe 8 values. Therefore, memory bandwidth and network speed for the interconnects is actually much more important than processor clock speed. Also, GPUs, which are so often hailed as a silver bullet to all your computation needs, don't work all that well because of the bottleneck of transferring data to and from them. So the well-developed methods of parallelizing the solution of a dense matrix do not work well for computational mechanics. There is, however, a solution. It is called domain decomposition. Instead of trying to break up the task of solving a very large matrix between the different cores, we break up the problem itself into different physical areas. If you are thinking of simulating an aeroplane, one core may simulate the area around the wingtip, the next section of wing, another core may simulate the flow around the engine nacelle, another still around the fuselage, and so on. By decomposing the flow domain in this way, we have not one large matrix equation to solve, but several smaller ones which can be parceled out to the various cores. Each subdomain solves the flow field within its own cells. At the boundary between neighboring subdomains, there are special cells called halo cells in which the values are shared and regularly updated between the neighboring subdomains. Now remember, each domain is on its own core, and therefore some domains may not even be on the same node. Therefore, a fast interconnect is needed like InfiniBand in order to transfer data between the halo cells during these updates. As I've explained earlier, even retrieving data from memory is a bottleneck for these sort of simulations, and even a fast interconnect is slightly slower than memory. Therefore, it is worth considering how best to partition up or divide up the domain in order to use the least amount of bandwidth when transferring data between different subdomains. In practice, this means minimizing the number of halo cells around each subdomain in order to decrease the amount of data which needs to be transferred. That means that in most cases, the naive solution of slicing the domain into subdomains along its length is actually a bad one. It's better to break it up into pieces as near as cubes as possible in order to minimize the number of halo cells needed. The good news is that there are several specialized libraries such as Scotch or Metis which will do this automatically for you and will find an optimal solution for the partitioning of your computational domain. Of course, it is necessary that all subdomains have roughly the same number of cells and therefore represent the same workloads to the computational cores responsible for them. If one core has a much heavier workload than another, due to having more cells, it will work for longer while the other cores sit idle waiting for it to finish. This is known as load balancing. If the computational load is balanced between the cores and the number of halo cells has been minimized, then one can expect relatively good performance from the CFD solver, provided that the number of cells per subdomain is greater than a threshold value, usually between 5 and 10,000. In practice, what this means is that if we use 2 cores instead of 1, our simulation should complete in half of the time. If we use 3 cores instead of 1, it should complete in a third of the time of a single core, and so on. This is known as linear scaling. Linear scaling continues until either the number of cells per core drops below the threshold value, or the benefit from using more cores is exceeded by the overhead, either in communication or some other inherent property of the CFD code. Adding more cores beyond this point can actually make performance worse. To summarize, computational mechanics techniques involve solving partial differential equations numerically in such a form that they result in sparse matrices. To get the best out of HPC while solving these problems, one needs a large problem, a higher speed memory access, and a high speed interconnect between nodes.